battles on the front line in the Horn of Africa. It's estimated that 500,000 troops are still deployed on both sides of the disputed border between Ethiopia and Eritrea. After the fragile ceasefire was dented in October with a fresh outbreak of fighting, the long-term future of the region has been plunged into chaos. And now, in a new twist, Eritrea has accused Ethiopia of the forced deportations of its nationals.
When we were friends, I was not of the opinion that he was capable of invading us. I was not of the opinion that he was capable of stabbing us in the back. A lot of water has flown under the bridge since then, and that requires a review of attitudes and approach of the past.
But both sides still blame each other for starting the war. Amidst the overgrown trenches lie the remains of soldiers, a testimony to the vicious battles that took place in the Badme region in February 1990.
This is a war that was started by the Tigray fight in Eritrea during that time. This is to say that this the current conflict, the current war, and the previous war from the early 1960s into now in Ethiopia, it's not new that the Tigray have always been at war against one group or the others. In the last 30 years, they've been in power in Ethiopia. They have never stopped fighting. They're just fighting against Oromos, the 30% population of Ethiopia, which is currently about 50 million out of 130 million of the country populations. And nobody hear about the war because the TPLF, the Tigray, when they were in charge from 1930 to 2018, they have silenced the voices of the people by cutting off the internet, refusing to allow journalists to cover the war, genocide, and massacre. And they have did a pretty good job of silencing the cameras by cutting off the telephone services so that nobody can share anything. And now all of a sudden the people are tired of the war by these groups. They decided to fight back, starting at the beginning of 2019. Now again they are at war, fighting against its neighbor once again. But this is just one of its war that Tigray was fighting at the time as a part of Ethiopia, because they control Ethiopia at the time. So this is going to be known as Ethiopia war against Eritrea. Eritrea are tired of living under this Tigray dictatorship, the oppressions. They fought these groups and were able to get their independence from Tigray. At the time, they are fighting the Tigray for independence of their country. No, Eritrea have been independent, but this is the war at the time, 1991, fighting between Tigray and Eritrea.
1999, when tens of thousands of young recruits lost their lives. Ethiopia eventually retook the strategically important border village of Badme that Eritrea had occupied since May 1998. Now, the village is deserted, apart from a few guarding soldiers. An Ethiopian commander, who didn't want to reveal his name, is unrepentant about what happened here.
Lightsabers are finally a reality, and you can own one. This new military flashlight is basically a lightsaber that...
Here. One should expect casualties during battle, that's a fact. And remember, I didn't give you any figures. But whatever sacrifices, we the Ethiopians are determined to get our land back. That's the bottom line. Our land will be liberated, whatever the cost. But for the refugees who fled the fighting, the cost is already too high. As uncertainty about the future continues, the risk of a hunger crisis grows daily. Hundreds of thousands of people on both sides of the border are assembled in refugee camps like this Ethiopian one. In a region blighted by past famines, once again, the people are relying on food aid to survive. Some of the displaced have moved into makeshift tents. They try to recreate a sense of normality, but the living conditions make survival all the more difficult. These Ethiopians used to eke out a living trading with their Eritrean neighbors. Now, many can only think of the raids. We were shelled all the time. Nobody can live in the village now. We were Ethiopians that lived there, but Eritreans live there too. Although not as many, but we always lived in peace.
These people are the victims of war. Second side also, there is no grains, no proper food, enough food, no shelter. So I don't know what will happen for the future.
The refugees can only wait until they're told it's safe to return home. They know that the war is not about land, but about differences over the region's economy. After Eritrean independence, both countries failed to sort out many important trade-related issues. In the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, although life appears to be routine, no one is untouched by the war. While some have sent their sons to the front line, others have been hit by economic constraints. Despite Ethiopia's 60 million people outnumbering Eritrea by 20 to 1, like its neighbor, it's suffering from an economic meltdown, fueled by hostilities over scant resources that lie in the border region.
As a dweller of Addis Ababa, I see roads are not being repaired because the money is going to the war. Cost of life is rising, cost of especially food.
The futurity for us is just like we are going to the dark, you know, if the fighting is just keep carrying on. But we just want to push our government to end up this fighting as soon as possible.
The daily news brings little hope. Both sides use excuses to justify cross-border aggressions.
When you have two large armies confronting each other, the potential danger is always there. We are also within Eritrean territory. In the course of exercising our right of self-defense, we have ended up being within Eritrean territory. Therefore, the areas from where Ethiopian troops would be withdrawing would also be identified. That's what we are saying. Ethiopia would be withdrawing from position A, B, C, D, period. Eritrea would be withdrawing from positions within Ethiopia A, B, C, D, E. Now, simply because for some inexplicable reason, it has been difficult for third parties to get Eritrea to agree to this. If another round of hostilities were to break out, then it would be indeed tragedy.
This is the border region that's allegedly witnessed the forced exodus of 65,000 Eritreans from Ethiopia. Eritrea claims that Ethiopia is deliberately putting the lives of thousands at risk by deporting them through a heavily mined border region. About 2,000 people a week are being escorted across the border by the army. Many see it as ethnic cleansing, and the Red Cross is monitoring the situation.
Most of them have been residents for many years in the other country. Also, they had the nationality of the other country. Some of them were even born there. They were grown up there. Some of them even don't speak the language of the other side. But all of a sudden they have to leave, either because they are being deported or for economic reasons. They have to start an entirely new life.
Whatever the arguments over the border, the conflict is affecting the economic development of both countries. Eritrea, in trying to develop its own economy, is undermining Ethiopia's plans for developing her border region. And in an attempt to destabilize each other, both governments are meddling in other border wars. Eritrea has gained a reputation for aggression through its wars with Sudan and Yemen, and has now become mixed up with events in Somalia.
The situation in Somalia, as you know, is very chaotic, and all sorts of terrorist groups have been attracted to that area. Therefore, the Eritreans thought that they could take advantage of that situation and open another front. But that effort was rendered an absolutely futile exercise.
After years of dealing with conflicts in Africa, the Organization of African Unity has a realistic target of what first base should be.
There is little you can do in terms of sensitizing our member states on the need to reduce the armaments when the situation, the overall situation of the continent is that of precarious security and stability. So I think we should first address the problem of security and stability in the continent, and the issue of armament should be, in my view, a consequence of that.
The shaky ceasefire is holding for the moment, but nobody thinks it will last. In this part of the world, compromise is seen as a weakness, so it's almost expected that the fighting will reignite.
One does not have to be converted into a pacifist to recognize that the writing is on the wall. That it's either accepting a peaceful way out.
This guy is the Tigray rebel leader at the time during the war. He eventually became a prime minister of Ethiopia for the last 30 years, and he never stopped the war. He just extended into within the country of Ethiopia genocide upon the people of Oromo, the Amharas, and stealing the resources of those groups and selling those resources out to West, while the rest of the population is living in poverty, dying out of hunger, starvation, and mass genocide by these guys' army. The same army that is right now starting a war with the current Ethiopian Prime Minister.
Or face the consequences of continued aggression. So the choices, in my view, are stark.
Refugees describe what the latest deportations mean to their generation. They recall a time when the Ethiopians and the Eritreans were united. Their shared ancestry makes the current conflict all the more difficult to stomach. I'm terribly hurt because I'm one of those that intermarried. My children are half Eritrean. I'm Ethiopian, and I know the past. I'm very active in the community, and I was active in the Eritrean struggle for freedom, supporting them. Our children and their children, the fighters are buried, covered with the same shroud. We fought against the Derg, and now I'm hurt, and I can't get rid of it. Few people have faith in their leaders to find a lasting peace. Their lives are instead filled by eternal hope. But one thing is for certain. If the conflict between two of the world's poorest nations continues, they will undoubtedly fall further into despair.